Good evening, Germany. Today, die Alternative zur Lindenstraße auf Englisch. Willkommen, Heiko. Willkommen, Dan. From now on, I'm only going to be speaking English because Heiko had this amazing idea that based on our first interview with Dan that I only did with him in German, we're now going to give him the chance to shine in spotlight and we're going to be the fool Heiko to speak in English and then going to be the champion. And I'm not saying you made yourself a fool on the first podcast episode. So whoever wants to know more about Dan and his career, where he came from, being a new Kiwi kickboxer, coming to Germany, being immersed in the agility movement here, having done some amazing work for the last 20 years. And that's actually also part of our idea that we invite experts and I tease some stuff out, then Heiko listens to them. And then, lieber Heiko, you can give your Senf dazu.
Awesome.
and that's what we're going to do today. You're going to give, in English, we're going to say your 2 cents, deinen agilen Senf dazu. So it's going to be a fun episode. And the topic is, again, the disconnect between management, business, and IT software development and the agility stack in between. Yeah, and thanks, Dan, for coming back again on our show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for the invite, gents. I'm really looking forward to the chats, and let's get the party started, shall we?
Yes.
Yeah,
Heiko, why don't you start?
Really, yeah, first of all, we have to thank Dan for joining us here and help us to do our first steps in English. And second topic, now to all the audience, where I had promised that we definitely will push up and the Agilen Senf into an English version. So now it's done. We delivered what we promised. Quite cool to do that now in English. And what I love is now it's for me difficult to divide between the Dans. Yeah, so both have a clear anchor with New Zealand. One moved to New Zealand, the other moved to Germany. So and I've joined New Zealand for 4 weeks, just 4 weeks ago. Yeah, awesome episode here. Let's start. Yeah, and let's kick it off. So then throw something in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I start with the story that I typically start with, right? This is talking about the layers of software development, right? So for me, when I talk about agile software development, I think of these 3 layers. And so this is my 3-finger diagram.
Yeah.
The middle layer is this agile layer. And this is, so to say, the typical agile story where we're talking about story points and, Scrum Masters, POs, the typical agile story, whether that's safe or Scrum or less or whatever. It doesn't really matter. This is, of course, the layer where everyone's focused. And this is, as we like to call it, the dance party. Everyone wants to come to the party. The problem is, whilst this is necessary, it's not sufficient. And agile software development is one of the most disciplined and complex ways of delivering software. In order for that to be successful, we've got to make sure that we have the proper technical foundation. So as Danny mentioned, I've had 20 years of experience, more or less, in enterprise software development, right? And here we have, as a technician, as a practitioner, this is the area that I've been focused on for the last 20 years. And this is where I see inefficiencies and ineffectiveness. This is, of course, the layer where we're talking about integration, automation, optimizing and streamlining processes. I've called this in the past the plumbing. It needs to be there. It needs to be invisible. To go with the dance party analogy, we like to call this the dance floor, right? Everyone wants to come to the dance party, but if the dance floor is broken and kaput and there's holes everywhere, then no one's going to have a good time. The problem, however, is from a practitioner's perspective, this is where all the inefficiencies lie. This is what makes agile software development at scale move fast and successfully from one place to the next. The problem, however, is this is not where typically the biggest problem in software development is. And this is the disconnect between the IT layer and this practitioner layer and the business layer. And, fundamentally, this is where projects go offline, right? And this is where we've got this disconnect, we've got misinformation, and we've got a lack of alignment. And so, in my opinion, in order to be successful with agile software development, we've got to have an alignment across all 3 of those layers. And we've got to look at each of those layers and make sure that we're doing the right things or we're laying down the right foundations to enable this kind of harmony and this synergy that we have. And this doesn't necessarily mean having a dogmatic approach and everybody having to do exactly the same things. But what it does mean is it means establishing a line in the organization where you say, good to us looks up here. You know, where we've got the plumbing in place, we've got the dance floor, we've got the party tuning, and everybody's aligned and everybody knows what's going on. Because if you're not playing up here, you know, if the party's not down here, and if you're down here, then this is where we have dissatisfaction, we have wastage, and in the end, you know, we have all of the, you know, the negative connotations of a poorly run or a poorly aligned, let's say, IT infrastructure. And this for me is really the basis of my whole belief, shall we say, and the experience that I've had over the last years.
Yeah, I agree. So quite interesting that you put it into three layer. So I will call the dance party, you call it dance, so a little bit, the culture layer, because I would like to bring it down to two layers. Because if you see a company as a whole, and as you know, if you talk about agility and making a company agile, this is nothing which stops on IT or a certain department. So you can decide to do it for a whole company or not, and then you have the certain flavors within. Maybe IT do it a little bit deeper than a business unit. But at the end, I would like to combine it to two layers, which is technology and culture. And put in the center of that picture, and that's maybe which brings then also to three layers, is a DevOps culture. So because when you look at companies, and I discussed it a lot now in the last 4 weeks now heading up for my new role. So what is the let's say core belief or the core strategy to come to a target picture for a big company? And you can reduce it to one sentence to make DevOps teams successful. So if a DevOps team can do daily deployments, that mean you need a quite close business alignment, which you put on the top to the middle layer, without a clear cross. So I call it a BizDevOps team. So when you have a full working cross-divisional team, then you only need the technology underneath to do that kind of, which means you need the testing stuff, you need the CI/CD stuff, but you also need a kind of, let's say, microservice API-driven platform where you get all the stuff out of a dev catalog which you need to deploy. So and this brings up a quite of dilemma, which I think also Danny saw a lot of times in HR transformation. This is the question: where do you start? So if you have a full DevOps team, a lot of people ready to go, then you always struggle with the technology foundation, with the platform itself. So we cannot deploy because certain functionality is missing. So if you focus only on the technology side, then you leave the business behind, and they always say, "Hey, why do you need that money? Why you do that kind of technology stuff? We would like to bring our business initiatives faster to the market." So I think that's so regardless whether it's 2 or 3 layer, the balance between so how you interact these 2 layers, and how you, let's say, bring a certain foundation up and running. Then you do the experience on the DevOps side, and then you may swip back to the technology, because then you may need certain. So it's more or less a wave scenario. So it's not A and then B has to come. So this kind of interaction. And as you know, if you look at big software initiatives, they always struggle, as you mentioned, on that business IT alignment at the side. They struggle on how we test our big software, our monoliths at the end. And I come to the clue, on your 3-layer model, you have to bounce in a certain time between these layers to see what it's, and you have to see it as one, and to see it as one company. And then you come to that, let's say, technology and culture layer, which both have a strong dependency.
And can I add the question to you guys? So we often talk about the most critical decisions should be done in the beginning of a project. But actually, in reality, the reverse is true. You know, you scope it, you get a budget, you go through some kind of institution within a company that you get the budget, you know, the funding of the startup, and then you start, but no one really knows what this is about, right? And as you do more stuff, you get more information, more data. And then at some point you confront the management with, oh, it's going well or it's not going well. Or we talked about the watermelon effect then, right? It's always like you tease out these, or you wait until the most critical decisions is almost too late. And I'm asking myself, how can we bring this back to allowing the management to make the most critical decisions in the beginning, or at least bring awareness to them that maybe it's not even possible. We are just in a planning stage and all the planning is theoretical and it might just change in practice.
So interesting points, right? And so perhaps maybe a couple of ideas. So if we talk about, the level of agility that we have from a cultural perspective and the level of agility that we have from a technical perspective, I think we have a fundamental question that should be asked at this point in time is, what's the gap? Are we more agile from a cultural perspective? Are we more agile from a technology perspective? Because the bigger the gap, the more difficult it becomes to keep these things aligned. We've got to think about how we can do this and what's the magnitude of the step that we need to take. So, I mean, as any true agilist would say, it's not about having a solution, the perfect solution from day one, but it's about learning and iterating and making these small steps and then constantly improving. So it's about building in this kind of concept or this culture within the organization of improvement, of incremental changes with a kind of let's say a measurable attitude. So for me, this comes down to observability. So this has really been the focus for the last year for us, is to bring kind of observability into the game so we can really understand from a data perspective or a data-driven perspective what's going on. So the rules of observability are, there's typically 4 steps to make a successful kind of concept with regards to data-driven decision-making and so forth. The first thing is to observe the data. You have to be able to get the data, whatever that might be. There's lots of different moving pieces inside inside an organization or inside a large organization, multiple perspectives that need to be satisfied. But we need to get the data. The second thing is then we have to give that data some kind of context. We have to make it meaningful, because data alone is not enough. It's not going to tell you something that you can use and be actionable, which is the third step, right? Make that information somehow actionable. So now we have the information, we've put it into some kind of context. What are we going to do with it? All right. All good. But the fourth step and the most critical step, and this is where we bring the alignment back together, is we have to make sure that the actions and the insights that we've learned are somehow aligned with business value, so that we can have this alignment on why it's so important to make those steps. And yes, it is often true that there's this pressure from the business to get on with it and get new features out the door faster, better, louder, whatever, but without then having this corresponding invest in the infrastructure and streamlining processes and so forth. So, I think as a general concept, this should be what these kind of systems should aspire to, is to create that context where we're getting data, we're getting feedback, we're able to take steps forward and measure and use that information to inform how we move forward, and also make sure that there's a clear communication. Why should we do this? What's the motivation?
Absolutely.
And this comes from both directions, from the top and from the bottom. And I think, generally speaking, this learning culture is one of the most powerful things that Agile can, or Agile development concepts can introduce into an organization, regardless of the size.
I totally agree. I think these 4 fingers I like a lot, especially the finger number 4, because I see, especially in that finger, the issue. Let's go to that level of big software development. So let's say we have 200 developers with business people building a large, maybe what kind of software, whatever. But so that's the question, Dan, whether you see that also a lot in the past out of your experience. So in the beginning, when you create, let's say, the key BizDevOps team, normally you are, let's assume they start with design thinking to create the value, whatever. There is a certain point of time where they define the certain outcome value of the software product. And at that point of time, they also should say how we can test that the software, if it's created, creates really that kind of value. They always struggle with these end-to-end tests and whatever. And this, why I say, that's the reason why I think we should really see that as a whole, not do it like a level, because in your model, it's maybe the last finger on your model, but certain components you need really from start. Yeah, if you don't do it from start, then you struggle a lot with testing. No one is aware what is really the business outcome, where we have to contribute and whatever. And I think this is quite crucial, and this is why always management gets nervous. Yeah, so they see this maybe 6,000 unit test and whatever, but where is the test case which really creates and prove that the business value and the business outcome is created by that kind of software? So I think we need something upfront, which and maybe it's also a kind of quality gate which we only can pass when we have that when we answer these kinds of questions, because they are crucial for the teams behind. Because if the teams behind and you have maybe a level of 3 or 4 different teams on that, so how should they do their components and how should they do the testing when they don't have a clear business value or business outcome where they can refer to? I think this is a crucial point, and that's why I come to the clue at the end. You have to see as one big model, like the 4 fingers you have. For sure, you have initiatives which come from top to down, and also from top to down, and then they meet in the middle. But you need certain components or quality gates, whatever, which you have to set up. And if you don't set up, don't blame the whole software team on what you're doing on testing and whatever, or even on performance. Yeah.
And that's then, if I may ask, we have this model, right? If I look at lean startup, build, measure, learn, and I see so much bullshit agility bingo going on of MVP. We need to build an MVP, but I haven't seen companies be really good at building and scoping MVPs and being okay with the shitty first version as our first quality gate. Is this something that our customers really want? And yes, we can go through a design thinking process, which can be anywhere 3 to 6 months, or we go down, we build something and give it to customers and learn on the fly. And there's 1,000 other ways to do it. But I really see there's no risk appetite for MVPs for smaller scopes while thinking bigger. Of course, we want to build something big, but these little tiny steps in the beginning that would also give management clear indication, do customers want that or not? I really don't see this happening with big companies. I see this with startups because there's a necessity. As you know, then you would love to build this big software, but you don't have the developers and the resources. But big companies do. They have the budget. And then they go for this waterfall approach they call agility now.
Yeah, or this iterative scrum fall or iterative iterative scrum. Yeah, interesting points. And there's a lot of interesting points. I've just got to make sure I remember all the points I've been thinking about. But yeah, I mean, so first of all, my observation in most enterprise systems is that there is no real small scale project. Typically we're dealing with a big vision anyway, right? And in most cases, the development that we're doing is some kind of iteration or incremental change on the system. It's very seldom the case that we tear up exactly what we've got and we start from scratch, right? So the first point to say is that the conditions of enterprise scale systems is very different to that of a startup, as you pointed out. Delivering software on a small scale is very, very different to delivering software at scale. In my opinion, there are a lot of assumptions that are made in the process of delivering and creating software. So there's a role play, like a typical agile role play called the 3 Amigos, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. The 3 Amigos are the developer, the tester, and the business analyst, right? They are representing the various stakeholders when it comes to software development. Now, my problem with this model is that it's all just an assumption until the customer gets their hand on the product, right? So everything that we do, even if we've put in the best interest into best intentions, the best research and so forth, until the customer's dealing with the software or the product that we've created, it's all just an assumption. So that's why I think of it as the 4 amigos. And the 4th amigo is the user and the customer. And this, of course, means that we need to be bringing in the inputs and the feedback from the field into the software development process. Now, in my experience in most enterprise systems, I could probably name on one hand the number of instances where I know that developers have had any kind of contact with the user, right? It's all through layers and proxies and so forth. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems that we see. Just because we're dealing with a large scale doesn't mean the rules change. We still need to be bringing in this input as unfiltered as possible into the game to make sure that we're building a product that really is customer centric and meeting the needs of the customers and the users that we've got. So this is an important thing, and I think this is a huge mindset change when it comes to looking at how an organization develops or builds their software. And Heiko, I like what you were saying about these quality gates as well. So, there are so many different aspects to quality. So we have the quality of the product, and that can mean a whole load of different things. So we have internal quality. This is where we're typically talking about unit testing and really dealing at the in the white box, really deep into the weeds of the functions and so forth. And there's a lot of tools that we can use for this, not the least of which is test-driven development. And test-driven development is one of the few ways that we can really ensure a high level of code coverage. But test-driven development is fundamentally not a quality tool. It's fundamentally a design tool. It's a design. It's a way of focusing the attention of the developers and the testers and the business analysts to make sure that we're building the product which is as tightly bound and as close as possible to the goal that we're trying to achieve, as dictated from this requirement and so forth. But this is also, for me, test-driven development is an artifact for developers in this kind of internal quality perspective. If we take a broader picture, the business, the owner of the platform is not really interested in what the unit test quality is. That's just, are things being done the right way? The bigger questions, are we doing the right things? And this then is the behavior-driven development, specification by example mindset, or acceptance test-driven development. And this is, again, whilst it's fundamentally in this quality context, actually what it really is a collaboration tool. It's a means to make sure that the organization, the development team and so forth is coordinated. They have the same understanding. So when I look at the bigger picture, and Heiko, you mentioned, how do we start? How do we do this? What's the first step? What we often see when we come into companies is that there is a bias towards manual testing with a little bit of automated testing. You've kind of got one foot in the automated testing, but it's not complete. It's not comprehensive. It's just focusing on making sure we're ticking the boxes. Where we have this kind of large scale, where we have this waterfall mindset, you have the design phase, the development phase, the testing phase, right? And then when finally things become stable, then we have the test automation at the end. And that's a typical pattern that we see. It's a question of tools. It's a question of resources. It's a question of capabilities in the organization. It is, however, obviously, it doesn't really satisfy this needs to streamline and to make things work faster, right? So the switch between manual testing and automated testing is just the first step. The second step is this continuous testing. So now we have the automated tests. We want them to run continuously, not just as a quality tool, but as a feedback mechanism. So now we're giving feedback constantly about the state of the code, the environments, the data, the configuration, everything that's going on. Every single time something changes in the environment, we want to get this fast feedback. And fundamentally, this changes the game, right? This changes the nature of the feedback loop that you've got on. But in my opinion, it's also not the final step. The final step is to move to the front and shift left. With the mindset. And that means, as you pointed out, Heiko, having that conversation at the start so we have a clear focus of what we should be delivering, and this clearly focused, clearly bound statement of what our functional, the function that we're delivering should look like, and then having that expressed as an acceptance test, which is then bound in turn to the continuous integration, continuous testing. And then we have this feedback mechanism, which basically empowers or enables the teams to move forward with a much higher degree of safety, shall we say.
And then I would take it from that point. So I think you perfectly described everything which we have on the testing side, on the technical side. Let's say from the biz to the whole DevOps cycle. Yeah. So what I learned, and I'm a technical nerd, and so it took me at least many years. I lose all my hair learning that is that the business side is even more complicated rather than the technical side. So we always thought that it's enough to have the guy who in German we call it Anforderungen, who put the requirements on the table, and put it into the DevOps team, and he learns Scrum, and that's fine. That is not enough. So business is quite complicated. So when we call a business requirement, so we have to ask, is it aligned to sales? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's put it. Danny's comment. Let's create an easy company. Let's put it into a startup world. So why is in a startup world quite easy, and why is it so complicated in big corporates? So because you have in a startup, you can easily align on a certain business value. It's aligned to sales. It's aligned to marketing. It's aligned to customer success. And they would say, okay, we will deal with that certain functionality. And we will guarantee that it paid off with our company goals. Yeah. So let's now switch to a big company. So there's a unit. Let's call it. Not a quite big one. Let's say mid-size. Yeah. So you have a product development. Product development works on a roadmap, has a budget, and is working only on features and functionality. So then product management quite easily decide, hey, let's do that MVP. Let's reduce the whole product to maybe 3 functionalities, and that's enough to get a first customer success on that. So then sales shows up. I never be able to sell that kind of mini. I will not roll all my sales force out to So first discussion. Next discussion, when you have it on customer success management, how should I support that? Where's all the documentation? So, and this is the kind of round we have to create upfront. So what is
that reputation? The product sucks. Our branding sucks.
You need marketing and all that stuff. So it's easy to decide on a functionality level on an MVP, but on a company, on a product level, which is a holistic point of view, you need also to align on that. So, and that is the reason why I think a lot of time this kind of testing is more or less the war line, where then sales is able to dig in and to say, hey, we didn't sign off that product. It's too small. We are not able to say. This is the discussion you have to do up front, and make clear this product has only 3 features. We will roll it out, and we expect you to do 2.5 billion on revenue on that kind of product, and you have to commit it here. If you don't commit it, we don't start that MVP. So this is the discussion I think we have to do up front, because everything we do behind it's clearly. So we have clear methods, we have clear process. We are able to do that test and unit test. But at the end, you have that experience made in big German companies. I see it all the time. Each company I join, I see they are all struggling with big software and product development because the biz in the BizDevOps philosophy is not well defined. Yeah, and that's the reason. Because also the test cases or the input for testing is not well defined. Because for me, it's not only functionality. So user experience, sales, and even marketing should have a share in that kind of discussion. So what is the outcome of the product that we are really able to be successful as a company on that MVP level? My point of view.
Can we talk about this more? Like, I think there's like maybe a few solutions in there. If we pick up Heiko's stream of thoughts of like how to align sales, how to align all those different functions within the business. There might even be competing sales. You have one channel versus this channel. Here they get more commission. Here it's more key account driven. So even within sales, they are not aligned, you know? And so there's all kind of challenges. And then what I heard you say, Heiko, is as well, no, we can't do that. This is a theoretical or hypothetical answer. You don't know until this product is shipped, and maybe we can then solve your issues later. But we focus on these 3 features because we think the promise is the highest here. And I'd love to talk more about these conversations and how we can solve them within companies and maybe protect the product owner and its development team and let them ship versus a lot of politics.
So fascinating points, right? And these are thoughts. These are points which actually I've spent a lot of time thinking about as well, right? And one of the things that I always find somehow ironic or is that, when we talk about these, classic waterfall style development cycles, where we've got this design phase, this development phase, this testing phase, and then when we think about what needs to happen in this testing phase where we have, unit tests, component test, end-to-end test, non-functional tests, security tests, and so on and so forth, right? Yeah. And it seems like an incredibly complex and time-consuming part. And, when that is manually done, it is time-consuming and takes time. But the thing is, or rather the thing that I find ironic about this is that, with an old school mindset, it's done once. You have a 3-month cycle and you go through one set of regression tests, one set of performance tests, one set of security tests, and so forth. In the end, there should be this bias towards automating all of those steps so that anytime there's a change to the system, it triggers a staged quality gateways where you go through your unit tests, your code coverage, the component, the end-to-end, then you switch over to non-functional tests, including the security and so forth. And every single time it passes one gateway, it goes to the next one and the next one and the next one. And that means that any code that goes through this pipeline from A to Z, there's a potential release candidate. It doesn't mean you have to release. It just means you can. And by fine-tuning this cycle with these stage quality, with this bias towards automation, what you do is instead of doing it once every 3 months, you do it once every 2 weeks, every 1 week, every day. You have this constant testing cycle. Now, the consequence of having a structure which enables you to do this is instead of having to do a 3-month block of code, you can do a 1-day block of code or a half an hour or whatever, because the cost of executing that quality cycle go towards zero. I mean, it's never going to be zero, but if you've automated as much as possible, the costs go towards zero. What this does is it gives you the ability to make a small change, to put a small experiment out, to do something incremental, to test or to validate what you want to do. And when I say test or validate what you want to do, what I mean is get the answer or get the feedback from the customer. Mm-hmm. So if we know, if we have with a high degree of confidence, we know that the quality of the application, it's secure, it's performant, it's doing more or less everything, all the other functionality has not been impacted. If we know that we can push these changes out at a much higher frequency, that our processes and that our so the quality of the product and the quality of our processes to enable this are high. And then fundamentally, we've got this high degree of alignment, meaning this collaboration, this conversation, that we're talking to the different stakeholders and we can push out these little experiments. These 3 things. So high quality product, high quality processes, and high business alignment gives you the best chance of commercial success. And what that means then from a BizDevOps perspective is that they are stakeholders that need to be involved in this conversation. Now, it's a very different conversation if you say, dear stakeholder, we've got a 3-month release cycle, put all your stuff into this, as opposed to, dear stakeholder, sounds like a great idea. Let's give it a go, and we'll put it out the door and see how our market responds. And this is, I think, what leads then to changing the mindset and changing this way from a kind of hierarchical, time-consuming, structured or rigid processes to a much more BizDevOps kind of style.
Everything needs to be planned 12 months because the budget is there.
So I think the magic word is product driven. So let's discuss this maybe for a second. I think if you really have a product driven company, which means we have a portfolio which is based on these kind of 3 products. We have a roadmap for each product. We have a core market and product managers and whatever. I think this is the ideal world, let's say, for everything we discussed, also for testing, BizDevOps. Then you are easy to apply, rather safe or less or whatever. Perfect match. But let's be honest. Looking into a German company, how many companies are really product driven? So they are always coming out of legacy, coming out of classic hierarchic structures, and always divided in this kind of classic. You have a sales department, you have several product departments, not even one, which are made segments or whatever, and then you have the operations and whatever. So dedicated silos, and this is, from my point of view, the most issue, that we don't have that kind of common product-driven process between them, where they all can align. So it's different business goals. Yeah, and that's why I think it's a kind of a suicide mission for a certain setup to really define what is the business value and business outcome everyone agrees on, because this means that they have to agree on these outcome out of their silos and their dedicated goals. And I think this is the eye opener we should bring to a company, to say, hey, you have to decide what kind of sense does it make to have maybe a full agile organization, but steer it with a classic silos target model, whatever. You can stick to your silos, but then at least bring in a clear product portfolio, lifecycle management, whatever, which you align to the QBR and whatever, or these process. I saw that a lot. In the past, even in my beginning, working for T-Systems and bringing solution into customers was also a kind of difficult issue, because you have that small, tiny block, but where do I fit in? What is the overarching product strategy? Where do I, as a supplier, not even inside the company, bring my value in? And how can I prove that I really bring value to my client? I think this is a crucial topic, and I think this is something, especially when you start an HR transformation, you have to work as a company as such on that kind of paradigm, because I see that a lot, that you work on safe or less to cope with the complexity of HR. Yeah, that's cool model, but if you don't have the connection to a product development or product lifecycle management, I call it. Quite difficult, because then you create a product and you create a value which even is not aligned to the whole company. And then you have, from last comment as described, this is more or less a classic setting. Then you have that kind of error culture, let's say, because if then a product goes worse, in the HR world, you say, okay, we learn and we just start new, or we learn out of our failures and bring it into the next release. But in the classic world, you have the discussion, no, it's not my fault, I don't pay that additional, the discussion. So there's something missing, there's something obvious in companies which everyone who deals with big software development should make transparent, because at the end, so you can decide, put this issue upfront and even make it transparent to a company. For sure, it's not easy to let's say restructure a whole company and to bring it to a product-driven company. But to make that transparent, hey, I start with just these requirements. They may not fully aligned to the company, but we have to live with that kind of gap, and we agree on that our product is proven and it's 100% ready if these outcome can be tested. So and then you have that kind of island, let's say, of freedom where you can work on and give. Also, what I find quite important, also to give the feedback to the teams, they succeed on what, because how frustrating it is if you work several months on a certain product outcome, you fulfill all your test requirements, but then may a board of management say, no, we don't go live with that kind of software because we were not able to align it in a board. Yeah, so 200 software developers are full.
And Heiko, what do you think? I want to ask for your Agile and Senf, and then Dance. You pointed out something really interesting that startups brought to the game: the product-driven culture. And that's how they also create teams instead of silos. They have products, and then they create the structure around them. Sometimes they put marketing and sales in there. But if we go back to the classical siloed way, this is the standard for most companies, as we know. And just a simple question like this: who owns the customer? I think all the marketing would say we, sales would say we, and who else would say we? Legal, because we need to make sure. But there's no one really responsible for a product-driven perspective, or like the needs of the customer, so to say, that we try to fill through sales, through marketing, through the products we offer, the back-end services, the customer service we offer. So it's all aligned along this one product. And I think because we are vertically structured and we don't have this horizontal end-to-end thinking, product thinking, it's one of the biggest issues within companies. And my question to you, Heiko, would be, how can we implement this? How can we bring this horizontal layers that agility or the Agile stack wants to bring to companies, but from a also mindset, responsibility, and accountability perspective?
Yeah, Danny, I have thought about that a lot, and it's an easy answer. Customer-centric thinking. Start to ask your clients and make the feedback transparent to your company. And then something should happen in your company. It's easy like that. So at the end,
no one owns the customer, or everyone owns the customer.
Go to CEO, and it's sort of, if no one cares, then the company will die for sure. Just a question of time. So, but at the end, all also product-driven philosophy. Why do you product lifecycle management and all that stuff? Because all about customer, market and customer-centric thinking. So customers also could be a B2B or B2C scenario, but at the end, there's a customer who gives you revenue, and the sum of all the revenue makes your company successful, or if your cost is too high, maybe not successful. But it's easy like that then. And I think the structure we created behind, it's normally not logically, it's because of Taylorism we created. Because we need someone to do marketing, we need someone who sells the stuff, we need someone who creates a product, we need someone to deliver the product, and we need someone to do the operations or support, blah, blah. So it's a Tayloristic. And this is something you don't have in a startup. For sure, you have certain experience. So that's the difference between a startup and a big company. In a startup, you have a certain expertise, but you don't have a silo. That's the difference. So there's someone who thinks out of a marketing perspective and a customer. But one sentence brings to the table is, Dan, what's your view on that? It's really start with that customer journey, asking customer, and that's why I love design thinking, because Danny, at the end, you take a paper, go out to a train station and ask the clients, hey, what do you think about my product? I have never done a design thinking experience where all the people in the design thinking journey were not amazed about what the customer had said about the product experience they made.
Yeah, no, I find it fascinating. I mean, like I say, in the words of Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And the punch in the face comes from the customer. This is the reality, and just reflecting back what Heiko said, so from my own experience as a startup, as we grow the company, so now we have about 40 people in the company. We started off looking for generalists, right? Looking for people who could just do a little bit of everything, right? We didn't have the luxury to be able to afford a design team and a marketing team and a sales team and a customer success. This thing is something that comes as the company grows bigger and more mature. And then, of course, you, as a large company with lots of resources, you look for a specialist who's very good at that one thing. You don't need a generalist that can cover all of those things. And this then, of course, leads to this design thinking. So how to deal with this, or there is obviously no easy answer for this, but this customer-centric perspective is something that we at least try to bake in. You know, every single feedback or touch point that we get with the customer gives us an opportunity to have that dialogue. And for us, it's about having this collaborative conversation about what's going on, what does it mean, what's the impact of this. And even in our small team, you know, we often run into the trap that, you know, we think we know best, that we think we know what the customer thinks, right? And this is, of course, you know, when you're looking at the problem, and we look at a very specific problem for so long, you know, of course we think we know better. The reality is, of course, this is not true. You know, we have an opinion. We have a strong, maybe sometimes a strong opinion on what good looks like. But in reality, you know, we have to make sure we've got this ongoing dialogue. And each organization, each team inside the each customer, each team inside the customer, they all have different requirements or different needs and so forth. And we have to therefore be sensitive to this, you know. And so making this a core part of the dialogue and making sure that this feedback is baked into the design and the development process is, of course, really, really powerful. So the final thought that I want, sorry, Heiko.
Go ahead, Dan. Yeah, go ahead.
The final thought that I want to add then is what's critical, therefore, is taking a system perspective, you know, and trying to think in systems and also looking at our own organization, but also as we come into this organization to try and create systematic ways of creating this feedback and baking those feedback loops into the way that we do things. And, you know, very often that means that, the problem that we identify or that we thought that we identified is not really a problem, but it's the symptom of the problem. And trying to understand where those problems are and then what actually causes those problems to try and get down to the root has been one of the ways that we've been able to at least overcome some of this bias or this subconscious, unconscious bias that typically gets injected into this whole development process. And like I say, it's the four Amigos, you know, so we have the design, the development, the testing, and then of course we just have to bake that conversation in whichever way, you know, however way we can get that feedback and use that to influence us.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe in the summary, a short story what I learned at Adidas for an example. At Adidas, the new CEO advised his team to do customer support. I think one day a week. So they get really real tickets out of the customer support on a daily or on a regular basis at least, and they had to react on that. So that means really you call the call center of Adidas had made some issues or questions to a product. So and it could be possible that you reach the CEO himself or at least one of his board members. But this brought a dramatic change to the way they thought about the product and how they steer the company.
Sure.
And I think this is at the end also to the dimension of testing what was we discussed also fit to that. Let's assume Danny creates tomorrow a company which let's say creates or produce a device you put on the door and you have an app and click on the app and then the door will open automatically. So if you bring it to that kind of easy customer use case, it's then for us also easy to define how we test the software, because at the end, the software is only working fine when we can open the door via the app. And then we can bring it down to all that unit test and do also the daily deployment. So I think in a summary, I think we improved a lot on the testing area and on the technology we have there. It's awesome, as you mentioned, Dan. So also the technology from your company bring it to the table. So that means it really enables the DevOps teams to do daily development stuff. But as you mentioned on the four-finger model, we don't have to stick on the certain technology level. So when we talk about culture, it's include the business level, and we have even a bigger complexity there. And I think the big paradigm we should there bring to the table is a customer-centric thinking, because this is something where all the business people have to align on. I don't say can, have to align on, because this is at the end about how you measure customer success, or company success and customer success, which is at the end a combination. I think this is let's say a quite big picture, but if we put it on this perspective, if we come from the front with the customer perspective, having that, let's say, biz IT alignment upfront, which means let's define the end-to-end case out of which we really can say that customer is successful with the kind of software we are creating. Then you can bring that to the BizDevOps teams, and then they can do their work on a daily basis. And I think what we also agreed on is that the best paradigm in a company to deal with all that, or to enable all these levels we discussed, is a product lifecycle management, or at least a product a way of thinking inside the company. And if you put that, we should create a picture of that. And if you have that picture, and you have a company which starts an HR journey, just check upfront where you are and where you may have your gaps. That will save you at least a lot of money.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I can just add my synth to the last word. I think this starts with a conversation that goes somewhere along the lines of, what does good look like? For this business unit, for this product, what does good look like? So it's not true that every product will have the same KPIs and the same measurements, but it is true that there will be some kind of measurable evidence of success, And to start off with, that might be an incorrect assumption that we make, right? But just to ask the team, what does good look like? To make sure that we're all nodding heads when we talk about what's the goal that we're aiming for. And this can then be measured, right? And this can be included with all of the KPIs that we might have about the, efficiency and the quality of the product and so forth. And then it becomes an orientation point, because then we have a means to have a dialogue, even with those people that are completely disconnected from the customer. Because now we're saying what good looks like to us. We've got a common sense about what good looks like, and let's think about how we can make that better. And then constantly validating this with the customer and seeing what the feedback is and so forth. And I think this is an extremely powerful concept. And I think this has the ability to change not just a startup, but also a large organization. That's a message that can go all the way up the hierarchy to give this alignment. And I think in the end, as we said multiple times, it comes down to this question of alignment and making sure everyone's on the same page and that we're all pushing in the right direction. Yeah. Very cool stuff. Very cool stuff.
Any other messages, Heiko, that we should care?
Millions. So at least we need 10 additional episodes to bring this discussion to
which is what I wanted to say. I'm sure it's just the first of many conversations that we're going to have with Dan on the topic of getting shit done. We spoke about customer. Heiko, you mentioned the idea of doing support. So if Adidas board members can do it, I think every team should do it. Go out there, talk to customers. The product-driven mindset, which is probably what we discussed between sometimes the misalignment between tech culture and the culture, or the tech and the Agile culture, and the gap between the two. That's what we talked about. You added the customer amigo then. So it was a lot of customer discussions we had. Any other main messages, core messages that we want to tease out? Not any new points. I know there's 1,000 new points, but anything that we want to highlight. And it is, of course, what you said then, is it good enough? I think this is also really good question to always ask that we talk to the customer. Is it good enough?
Sure. So I think the observability points are really powerful too. So those 4 points there. So observe the data, create some context, make it actionable, and then make sure this aligns. This is an extremely powerful, and, regardless of the context, that brings a lot of value. For me, the equation for commercial success that comes out of all of this is efficient processes, high quality product, and then business alignment, right? That's the recipe for commercial success. And, therefore we need to think about how we're measuring this and how we're creating experiments and improvements to align towards this. And perhaps the final thought then is, with regards to the systems thinking, sometimes where we think the problem is just a symptom of the problem. And we've got to take this big step, a step back to be able to look at the organization or the system as a whole in order to be able to identify where the real problems lie. And, this is addressing this BizDevOps mindset, right? Because as you pointed out, whilst we as technicians focus on this technical layer, right? There's a broader picture there. There's this broader dialogue. There's this broader concept of what good looks like, and this therefore only can be resolved if you're taking the chance to take a step back, or you're stepping back far enough that you can look at where the friction points in the organization are. But yeah, I think there's plenty more topics, plenty more points to dive into. But
my last comment, Danny, is for maybe the audience after that hours heard that it's quite complicated. If you try to, let's say, bottom up, change the company. If you are in a company where Agile is seen as a box and the rest of the company is working with that kind of box inside that company, then the only advice I do is start a learning journey with all that kind of business units. Bring them to the table and start with knowing nothing. And the best is then to do that customer centric, because this is at least something everyone can align on, to say, hey, let's ask our customer, our clients. And I think that's also where methods like design thinking quite close come to the table. And this creates a learning journey where everyone is right, So this, I think, is the most critical paradigm you need. Learning journey means no one has the answer, even if you work 20 years in the HR stuff. So this is my last advice to all the followers and listeners out there. Try to do that alignment you meant, then go to the business people and ask for a common learning journey, and start asking clients. And then you will, just after that, you will meet all the DevOps guys, and I think then a picture will create, and this is a common picture for the whole company.
Sure. And maybe our next conversation, thank you guys, could circle around all the legacy. We spoke about the future of BizDevOps, but that's not the reality. There's a lot of legacy. And just to change that, some companies I heard need 5, 6, 8 years, then they might be dead. So let's talk about that stuff, more technical, more IT heavy in the next episode. For now, I say thank you so much, Dan, for circling around with our idea. And thank you, Heiko.
Appreciate our time.
Pleasure to be on board.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure.
Thanks for the chat. Great points, and so many cool points to follow up on next time, right? Rock and roll.
And you will definitely get some Agile from Daddy. Yes. You have to send it out.
Everyone who's interested in listening to more of Agiler Senf, usually a German-speaking podcast, was our first English one. You find us on Spotify, YouTube. The video version is on YouTube and Spotify, but also on all other Amazon, Google, and of course, Apple Podcasts. So give us a comment there, give us feedback to this episode. We always love to improve and hear your feedback. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. See you all later. Bye-bye.